Hi, everybody. This is Jack Allwild with another money episode. Today, we have special guest Shaun Morgan with us, who has launched his new podcast, The Teacher Money Show. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
So before we get into the podcast and what it's like to be a teacher, how about we start out with your relationship with money growing up?
Well, I don't know where it came from necessarily, but growing up, I've always been frugal. I was just like, I didn't want to spend the money I earned. I wanted to kind of hoard. I was a bit of a hoarder for my money. I went to the store because just back in the day when your parents would just let you like walk anywhere. You didn't have to tell them. So I, walked to the store and I got myself a dozen donuts, right? And each donut probably cost like 50 cents. And my brother said, "Hey, can I have a donut?" I'm like, if you pay me $1, right? Trying to make money. I didn't want to give away my donuts because I worked hard and paid money for them, and I made sure that I had enough money at all times, and I didn't like spending it. I was the coupon cutter even in high school. Like people were like, "Oh, let's go out to eat." Everybody, we're all friends. Let's go out. And I was like, I have a coupon to this place. Like we could go there. Like I didn't want to go spend money if I didn't have to. So that's that's where I started out. And my parents talked about frugal living, setting aside money for retirement, things like that. Not like all the time, but I knew that was a priority, so I had that foundation growing up.
So your parents were really involved with, like, I guess, your personal finance education. Like they were really trying to set good habits.
Yeah, most of it actually came from I was a Boy Scout, and there's a personal management merit badge, so it's about time and money management. And my dad was the person who could issue those badges. I don't even remember what they call them these days, but like someone who was like allowed to mark off that you met those requirements. So, growing up, I heard him consistently talking about that because he had that certification, I guess. He would often talk about it to the youth at our church, and I heard him talking to it to my older brothers, and then I went through it with him. So it was just like something that he consistently was able to bring up because of that role. Even outside of that, he would say, never put money on a credit card you can't pay off. He'd just say things like that as little nuggets of wisdom growing up.
Mm-hmm. So how did your views maybe change or stay the same throughout college and into your professional life?
I maintained frugality pretty well throughout college. I worked myself through college without any debt. I went to a very inexpensive college. So if you're freaking out, like, how is that possible? Well, my college was relatively inexpensive because I chose a college that was not going to be super expensive. And then I chose to work through that entire time so that way I could do that. And I also had good grades, so I got like a scholarship and things like that. But I was able to get out of college without debt, just frugal throughout that entire time. And then I started working, and when you get your first job, you kind of have that assumption that I have a real job now, I can afford things. So I bought a house that I thought was a modest home, right? And my lender said, you can afford this, but I couldn't afford it. It took up 50% of my take home pay just for my house, let alone utilities or repairs or anything else on top of it. It's just like the main payment. So with that, I started struggling, had a little bit more debt issues, not like, deep debt issues, but just being a teacher, having relatively low pay. I mean, all throughout the number, I was bringing home $2,100 a month as a teacher. All right, it's basically, I think that's less than if you made $15 an hour, right? Working throughout the whole year. I had the summers off, but like I was also working late into the afternoons, early in the morning. So like hourly, I was probably making as much as somebody who gets a few raises at a fast food joint.
Mm-hmm. So now, were you single when you got that house, or what was your relationship situation? And how many bedrooms was that?
So I was married. My wife and I had our first child already. We just we decided that we wanted to have kids early because we wanted to be able to enjoy life later. So we like, let's get the kids done with and move on. So we got married. We started having kids pretty soon after that. And then we bought this home when I moved. So I went to school in Utah, moved to Colorado, and that's where I bought this home. And it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath because we expected to be there for a long time, to grow into it with our family, and it'd be great. But I mean, it wasn't huge. It was like 1,700 square feet, maybe. You know, it's a good sized home, but not a massive home.
Do you happen to remember what that? So you said it was about the principal, interest, tax, and insurance was like 50% of your take home pay. Is that what you said?
1050. It was 1050.
Okay. 1050. Wow.
Like
And I guess since you
60.
were married with a kid, house hacking wasn't really an option for you. So what did you just?
I tried so many like things in my head, like, oh, maybe I could do this or that. My wife didn't like any of them, and there's not a lot of opportunity for house hacking or anything.
So what was your next step then? So how did that must have been a hard decision. So how did that decision-making process come about, and where'd you go from there?
Well, from there, I decided my problem is I wasn't making enough money, obviously. So I realized that as a teacher, you can make more money just by having a master's degree. Like there's no extra step. You get a master's degree and they say, oh, now we have to pay you more. It's one of the dumbest systems for a raise on the planet. So I busted out a master's degree in 5 months. There's a school that's Western Governors University. They say however many credits you can finish in 6 months, we're only going to charge you once. So I just paid for 6 months and I just busted out the entire 2 years worth of material in 6 months.
Wow. And like how much of a raise were you going to get from acquiring that master's?
Like $4,000 a year.
Okay.
Something, like a good chunk of change. And, over the course of a long time, it'd be great. But I missed the deadline for the raise by a month. So like I got a slight bump in pay because I had more like professional development credits, but not the full amount. So I, dumped all this money into this master's degree and then didn't see the benefit of it immediately. And I was struggling this isn't working for me. So I needed to do something else. So then I started doing mobile notary, but I lived in a small town. There's 8,000 people. Love that town, Delta, Colorado. Highly recommend it. It's beautiful. But to do my mobile notary, I would drive for 2 hours one way, do an appointment and drive back. And I was getting paid well to do that. But, I was driving through the mountains in the winter at like 11 o'clock at night, hoping I didn't fly off the edge of the mountain. So that was terrifying. It was a little untenable. If I'd kept doing that, I probably would have died. So at that point, I realized that I needed to change. I needed more base income. I needed lower expenses. And COVID hit right in that time. So I moved from Colorado to Texas because housing was cheaper. I was able to get a 3-bed, 2-bath house on 5 acres for like half the costs of my other house, which was a little unusual, but still, like, that just shows you the difference in housing costs in West Texas compared to Colorado. And then on top of that, just they pay better in Texas than they do in Colorado, and things are generally cheaper in Texas. There's no state tax.
So I guess some people might be saying, well, if the pay's really not low, why did you keep doing it? So you must really like being a teacher. Maybe go through the passion of teaching.
I was struggling with that as well. But when that's what you're trained to do, no one hires people that aren't trained these. It's insane. Like, as a teacher, I'm trained in so many skills, but because my degree says teacher, people say, we want somebody else. So I considered looking for other jobs, but I figured I have a teaching job. If I get a teaching job in Texas, I can buy a home because they say, oh, you're doing the same job, right? The mortgage companies like that. So that was another reason I wanted to stay with teaching. And the new job I got was different. And I was like, okay, we'll try it. that new school was, there's a lot of great people there, but the student body was really wearing down on me, and I was really struggling. And then I actually ended up losing my job in Texas. Last one hired, first one fired, just like they ran out of money.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's actually the greatest thing that ever happened to me because I now have a job where I teach online, and it's better pay because the school is based in California. And I just like the environment and the student body better and all that. So it's been a really good shift for me. Now I love teaching again. And, I remember why I got into teaching, because it isn't about telling kids to sit down and shut their mouths. It's about helping kids like learn and grow. And I had kind of lost that along the way. So but yeah, I love teaching now, and I'm really glad for where I'm at.
So what company are you teaching through, and what type of ages are you catering to?
So I teach for a public charter school in California. It's called John Adams Academy. Highly recommend it. It's wonderful. But it's for kids in California right now. They're trying to do like a private element, but it hasn't started yet.
Okay.
But like it's for kids who are in a certain locality in California. But because I'm teaching at the online portion of their school, I can live in Texas.
Oh, so what subjects are you teaching them?
I teach humanities, which is a history and an English course put together. So we talk about ancient civilizations, Israel, Greece, and Rome, which are the foundations of Western heritage. So it's called Western Civilization 1.
Wow. So kind of a big difference from like your, I guess, proclivity towards personal finance. Why don't we now shift into, so how did you start the Teacher Money Show? Why did you think it was important to start it? And yeah, give us a background of what we can expect.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect someone who teaches history and English to be a personal finance expert. So what happened is this is my favorite story. My wife's like, why did we do this? We were first like weekend in Colorado. We are walking around this like fair, and I see this glass like window company, and they're like, hey, you can win free windows. So we sign up, and then they send a guy out there to, sell us some windows. And we're like, yeah, sure. I guess we'll buy windows, because the windows in our new house were terrible, which was a terrible financial choice, actually, although the windows were fantastic. But the guy comes, and he's just talking to us, being a good salesperson, right? And I mentioned offhand to him that I'd like to own rentals someday, because my dad actually owned a rental property, and my grandfather had as well. And I knew that it was a good opportunity. And he says, well, you should listen to Bigger Pockets, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, is a place that talks about rentals. And they also have a show on personal finance. And that just got me hooked. I love podcasts, hence me running a podcast now. I love listening to them. I love having great conversations. So just like hearing that constantly, it just made sense to me. You need to have good financial habits. You need to track your spending. You need to, make sure that you're spending money on things that matter to you. And I was able to just soak in all of this information. And I turned around and I looked at my fellow teachers, and they all sucked at it. It's just, teachers have this mentality that we don't get paid enough. And that's why we're poor. Oh, I'm putting myself on this sacrificial altar of poverty for the kids. It's for the children. And this mentality is that I'm a teacher, so I have to be poor. And they don't want to do anything about it themselves, because we can blame the government or the taxpayers or whoever else for us not making enough money, which, yes, teachers need to get paid more money. I am the first person to say, absolutely, we need to make sure teachers are getting paid enough. But if teachers had their own finances figured out better, then we wouldn't have as much of a problem. If teachers could spend money on the things that mattered and not things that didn't matter, if teachers could track their spending and know what money's coming in, what money's going out, if they could, just rein in their spending on different things and live a more frugal lifestyle, which you might be like, teachers all are frugal. Trust me, we spend a lot of money on things that we shouldn't. And if we just understood these principles better, we would have less problems.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned Bigger Pockets, the Bigger Pockets Money Show. I think that's with Scott Trench and Mindy Jensen. Are there any other podcasts that kind of really revved you up, got you inspired, or perhaps some books that really got you going?
You know, I have a lot of podcasts I've listened to bits and pieces of. I don't listen to as many religiously just because I have so many podcasts I need to get through. I listen to personal finance podcasts. I listen to history podcasts. I listen to podcasts like religious podcasts for myself. There's a lot of podcasts I listen to. So that's the one that I listen to the most. But I really love the FIT podcast, which is Financially Independent Teachers. That one's got some really good information for educators. Choose FI is a great podcast. I haven't listened to enough of theirs, but I really like their stuff. Another great one for teachers is the 403 Be Wise podcast, which is Teach and Retire Rich, is I think what the podcast is called. Teach and Retire Rich. All those are fantastic. I've loved all the episodes of those I've listened to. And then book wise, I actually read The Richest Man in Babylon when I was like
it's a great book.
14, and I loved it. So that told me back then that I really liked the idea of personal finance. So that book that's my number one recommendation. Is just like, that's where you start. I've read that book with 7th graders. We had like this like extra class that we got to do in a school I taught in. And I'm like, I'm just going to read really cool books. And we read The Richest Man in Babylon, and we talked about it, and they got it because the book is just so easy to understand. Anybody can understand the principles because it's just telling a story, and then it teaches you something about money. So it's fantastic. Highly recommend that one. And then the one that did the big mind shift for me was the classic Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a frustrating book because it's a mindset book. And if you don't realize that, you think it's going to teach you the secrets to becoming like super wealthy. And at the end, you're like, but how do you do it? Because he's not trying to teach you how, he's just trying to shift your mind. But to get in the right mind, to then learn the how, highly recommend that book and his sequels. Those are all great as well.
Awesome. Well, I will say my brother and I do a books podcast, and our very first book we read and discussed was Richest Man in Babylon. So you are a very cool teacher, Shaun, for introducing, because we were saying every like middle school and high schooler should be reading this book because it's so easy to understand. So kudos to you for that. That's great. Well, I'm very excited about the podcast. And before we close out, I like to ask everyone, what is the best and worst personal finance advice you've either heard or received?
Thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to come and talk about this in this podcast. Just real quick, my podcast is for teachers. So if you're not a teacher, it might not apply, because most podcasts for personal finance don't apply to teachers because they say something like, go ask for a raise. You don't do that as a teacher. You can't do that as a teacher. So if you know a teacher, I just ask that you tell them about this podcast, because it will change their life, and then they can teach The Richest Man in Babylon to their students, or something else like that, and we can change the lives of multiple people beyond just the teachers. So I would just appreciate it if you would recommend it to somebody, even if you are not a teacher. Now, best and worst financial advice. Worst financial advice, in my opinion, is anytime someone says, I've got this hot stock tip. As soon as somebody says that, run away. And it might sound like this: I've got this hot crypto tip, or there's this house that is just the perfect investment. It cannot fail. Anytime there's this guarantee of perfection in investment, just don't. All right. Usually those things are incredibly risky. You're probably going to lose your money. And if you don't, when you reinvest it the next time, you're going to lose your money then. Right? It's just the risk is so prevalent that it's going to hurt. Right. Instead, just stable, easy, basic investments are going to get you where you need to go. Now, for me, the number one, the tip that everyone needs to hear is track your spending. That's the basic. If you track your spending, you are getting immediate feedback on how you are doing. When someone says, go follow a budget, go build a budget. No, right? It's like dieting, okay? No one wants to go from I can eat whatever I want to I can only drink this protein shake and have like 2 carrots at the end of the day, right? You don't want to do that because that's not who you are. So when you build a budget, you're trying to go from eating whatever you want to 2 protein shakes and a couple of carrots, right? And first of all, you have no idea what you're spending on, right? You probably know your housing costs because that doesn't change. You probably know your car payment. But beyond that, if you've never tracked your spending, you have no idea what you have spent your money on. Just like no matter who you are, you do not remember what you spent your money on. You just don't. So tracking your spending is what can help you build your budget. You say, oh, I usually spend this much money. Let's try and rein that in a little bit. And then that's going to be my budget. Or I usually spend this much money. I don't want to spend that much money. Let's cut it in half. And then we'll work on getting there. And that's what you build your budget on. But if you don't track your spending, you're trying to diet. So tracking your spending is like counting calories, where you know how much food you're intaking, and you can then start cutting food that doesn't, improve your life. While on the other hand, tracking your spending, counting calories, building a budget is like dieting. Counting calories works, tracking your spending works, but building the budget and dieting, there's a reason why no one wants to hear those words. They don't work and they just make people frustrated.
Well said, Shaun. Yeah, I mean, you make me think of one of my favorite quotes since I've gotten into personal finance, and it's whatever gets measured gets managed. And yeah, well said. So,
there's something called Pearson's Law that says when you measure performance improves. And then when you measure performance and then report it, the rate of improvement accelerates. So if you're going to track your spending, tell somebody about it, right? As much as that might be uncomfortable, if you can report back to somebody how you're doing, you're going to just take off.
Like an accountability partner?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Okay, cool. Well, Shaun, I met you 2 years ago in Austin at FinCon. Will you be at FinCon this year?
I'm planning on it.
Cool. I hope to see you there. And before we head out, why don't you tell the audience where they can go to find the podcast, and if they want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the podcast is The Teacher Money Show. I started on Spotify, so that's the easiest place. It pops up best there, but you can also find it on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, and all these other places that you can find podcasts, or you can find it on YouTube at Teacher Money Show. And then I'm on Instagram at Teacher Money Show. I'm not very good at Instagram, but I'm on there. You can reach me there, or you can email me, Shaun at teachermoneyshow.com.
Awesome. Well, Shaun, it's been a pleasure. We'll send the teachers your way.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful to be here.